Welcome to the Therapy Show. I'm Lisa Mustard, your host and guide on this journey of learning and professional growth. Here, we transform the way you earn continuing education contact hours. Whether you're on a walk, on a break in between sessions, commuting, or even preparing dinner, you can engage with cutting-edge insights from leading subject matter experts. Each episode features conversations with seasoned professionals who share effective techniques and tools tailored for busy therapists like you. Our goal is to enrich your practice and fit seamlessly into your active life, ensuring you stay informed and inspired without the hassle of traditional methods. You can say goodbye to sitting in front of a computer screen watching hours and hours of recorded trainings. Instead, we make continuing education as easy and accessible as your favorite podcast. So make sure to visit the website, lisamustard.com, to sign up for our continuing education membership. It's a fantastic way to earn your credits while enjoying the podcast. Join us on the Therapy Show, where your professional development continues wherever you are. Well, hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Therapy Show. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard, and this week's guest is Rikki Ash. Welcome to the show, Rikki. It is so great to have you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be on.
I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. This does qualify for one continuing education contact hour. And as you guys know, Mustard Consulting is a MBCC approved provider. So if you listen to this pod course and you just decide that you want to go ahead and get the contact hour, head over to my website, lisamustard.com/pod courses, and you will see the pod course there. You can buy it individually, or you can purchase it through the bundle. So now that we got that out of the way, Rikki, I'm really excited for this topic. I know we're going to talk a lot about logotherapy. Recently reread Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and I'm just thrilled to have you here. Can you share with our audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you help people?
Sure. I am a life coach. You'll hear a lot about logotherapy in the coming in the coming hour, but I use a lot of therapeutic techniques in coaching. I've also been in education for a very long time, so almost a decade, teaching high school and teaching psychology. And I really fuse my love of psychology and my love of education into most of the things that I do. I'm really excited to share with you a little bit about why logotherapy is so impactful in my life and in my coaching practice.
Before we dive into that, I do have to let people know a little bit about your credentials, because they might be wondering, like, why do I have a life coach coming on with the ability to give continuing education? But your background, you have a master's in education, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I have a master's in education, and I'm currently 3/4 of the way towards my doctorate in education as well. I definitely have a lot of educational experience, and I've taken many courses, actually, even with Viktor Frankl's grandson on the topic of logotherapy. So I
Wow.
really tried to learn as much as possible from the source itself, or from as close as possible to the source itself. And I actually just came out with a book that really incorporates, it happens to be a book about my grandfather, who was a leader, a rabbi in his community in Canada for over 50 years. And really, what the book does is it explores his life, but through the lens of logotherapy, because it was actually a topic he was really passionate about, which is really researching about his life is what got me interested in it to begin with.
Mhm.
So that's really how I got here, is learning about his life, how he lived through logotherapy. He actually also did his thesis, his PhD on logotherapy. So it just kind of comes full circle.
Wow. Yeah. I was going to ask you, how did you get so interested in logotherapy? But that's really neat. So through your grandfather, that's where your interest came.
I think I was the only grandchild that read his dissertation, so I earned some points there. And then, after he passed away, when I was really writing this book about his life, I started realizing, he wrote so extensively on the topic, but not just did he write on it, but he lived it. And so that was really impactful. I wasn't necessarily looking to open something on logotherapy, but it kind of just happened because I was like, this is just, why don't more people know about this? People
Yeah.
need to understand it.
Right. And I agree with you. I think that it is such a fabulous topic. I was thinking about this last night as I was preparing to chat with you, that the way I see logotherapy is it's not so much that it is a technique or a skill that you use in therapy itself, but it's more of a framework for how you view the world and how you can help your clients and your patients, how they view the world and how are they living out the worldview or the values that they have. So that's just kind of one thought I
Yeah.
had last night. So I'm really interested to dive into our learning objectives And I know that these are also listed on the website, but I want to go over them with you guys while you're listening because sometimes people just don't read, right? So the first learning objective is describe the fundamental principles of logotherapy as developed by Viktor Frankl, including the concept of the search for and will to meaning. The second one is differentiate 3 ways to find meaning in life according to logotherapy, which are creative values, experiential values, and attitudinal values. Number 3, compare how logotherapy differs from other therapeutic approaches such as psychoanalysis and behaviorism. And number 4, demonstrate the ability to apply logotherapeutic techniques such as paradoxical intention, dereflection, and Socratic dialogue in practice. Okay, that sounds like a mouthful, but I promise you guys it's going to be a great conversation. I'll let you start with if you want to talk about, the fundamental principles of logotherapy.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so just to give you a little background, logotherapy was founded by Viktor Frankl, right? So he wrote his seminal work was Man's Search for Meaning, and he wrote this book before World War II, and he actually mostly worked with suicidal patients, actually. And he ended up in during World War II, he was taken to concentration camps, and that's really when his theory was tested because his theory had a lot to do with living life through meaning. And we'll talk more about that, obviously. Until you're in, a death camp, that's the ultimate test of whether this theory actually works. So that's a little bit about his background. But he was really a contemporary with a lot of other psychologists. And he really started to question some of the main thinking out there. So, for example, Sigmund Freud was obviously he's obviously like the father of
Mhm.
well, psychoanalysis, but anyone who's ever heard anything about psychology knows Freud. Freud actually believes that the point of life or that the will of a human being is pleasure, and it's all about pleasure. And Viktor Frankl started realizing with his suicidal patients that this was just not the case, that what often happens is what he would call an existential vacuum, this feeling of emptiness that a person has. And very often people would turn to drugs, turn to alcohol, turn to different things to kind of fill that void, that existential vacuum. And the way Freud kind of did it was this idea that it was all about pleasure. And Frankel really didn't believe that because when he realized with his suicidal patients is that that wasn't getting them anywhere, right? He would ask really like intense questions, things like even to someone that wasn't suicidal, he'd be like, "So why don't you commit suicide? Like why are you alive?" Right? In other words,
Mhm.
those answers were always resonant of something to do with meaning. It had nothing to really do with like, oh, because I want a bigger house, right? Or whatever it is. And so he started realizing and uncovering that there's a lot more to life and that the main drive of humans is for meaning. It's not about the pleasure.
Mhm. Mhm. Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Yes, especially after reading his book and knowing, but I didn't know that about him. I didn't know that background. I think I knew that the book was written before he went to the concentration camp, but I didn't realize because so much of the book is about his experience there.
Yeah, so what happened was he came up with logotherapy before.
Mhm.
He wrote a book called The Doctor and the Soul, which is really one of his most amazing books. I think it's even better than Man's Search for Meaning. And what happened was that manuscript was taken away from him when he went to one of the concentration camps, although he says that that's part of what helped him get through. It's
Right.
actually a logotherapeutic technique that he used, which was this idea of kind of rewriting it in his head
Mhm.
throughout his time in the concentration camps. And Man's Search for Meaning was not something he planned to write, actually, but people kept asking him, like, tell your story. And I believe he wrote it in like 9 days and it became a bestseller. And he was not happy about it because he said, that means that we have such a big problem in this world of meaning. And he wasn't happy about that. He didn't want this problem of meaning to exist. He would have been happy if his book never sold because no one had this issue.
Right.
So he really didn't write it hoping it would be bestseller. In fact, he actually almost didn't put his name on it. He really wasn't so interested in this becoming like a whole, you know,
Mhm.
thing.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. Wow, so cool. I'm gonna have to go and read it again for a third time now that I know this. So very cool. And actually read his other book as well, because I think I would really enjoy that other book as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what it is. What is logotherapy? How does he describe it?
Yeah, so really it's basically therapy through meaning.
Okay.
So I know it sounds fluffy, but it really isn't because what he talks about, and this is really important to get right, and it's actually something I didn't get right at the beginning. And when I actually wrote this book, so I sent it to Viktor Frankl's grandson, Alex Vesley, who actually practices logotherapy as well. And he was really furthering his grandfather's legacy. And he actually corrected me on this like a million times. And one of the really important things in logotherapy is that there's no such thing as creating meaning. And
Mhm.
Viktor Frankl is very firm on that. You don't create meaning, you find it. It exists. It's not something that you have to manufacture or come up with. It's something that you find in places, maybe that you expect and maybe that you don't, but it's not something you have to create from scratch. And that was really important and a really nuanced way of thinking about it, but I think is actually really important to understand that his point was life is full of meaning. You
Okay.
just have to uncover it.
Okay. So I want to ask you something because
Yes.
as a therapist, and I'm wondering if my friends out there, peers listening out there, are wondering the same thing. So we talk a lot in therapy about meaning, right? And so with clients, sometimes I'll ask the question, well, how does that make sense to you? What meaning did you get out of that? Because maybe they'll experience something as a child and they create meaning out of that experience. So I'm curious to know from that client, like, well, how did you what came out of that experience? What meaning did you make? Was it a meaning making experience? So in that sense, people do create meaning out of an experience. So is that different than what you think Viktor Frankl is talking about?
So I think it's still, I do think it's similar to what he's
Okay.
talking about. And when we get to some of the techniques such as Socratic dialogue, I think that's a perfect example of that
Okay.
actually. But it's more in the sense, I guess he was just very particular about the language. So even
Okay.
if what you said, right, experiencing something, but not necessarily, I guess he wouldn't say, oh, I made meaning in that experience, but I found
You
meaning
found
in,
meaning. Okay, that makes yeah,
yeah.
makes sense. So it
I
maybe
think it was just a language
yeah.
thing, you
So
know?
maybe it should be what did you find out from that experience about yourself?
Exactly.
Like what meaning? So I think we're on the same page. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
completely separate. All right,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
right,
same
cool.
thing. I think he was just very much into the idea that it has to be rooted in something that exists. It's not this like new thing that you're creating out of nowhere.
I gotcha. Okay, makes sense. So you said Viktor Frankl's grandson, Alex. Is that right? He went to your book or your paper and he kind of like made a bunch of
Oh, yes.
he read penned it, I guess.
Yes.
So what else can you share about logotherapy?
So I guess getting into what are the ways to find this meaning in life? What is logotherapy about? And so really, according to Viktor Frankl, there's three main ways that we find meaning in our lives, right? So the first, and I'll go through each of them, but just to give an overview, the first is creative values, the second is experiential values, and the third is attitudinal values.
Okay,
So what are these? Creative values, and this is kind of sounding funny because I just said don't make meaning, don't create
sure.
meaning, but
Right. No, we
but
get it.
the first tenet of logotherapy really is creative values. What that means is how do you find meaning? Through what you give to the world, through what you put out there, through what you create. So it could be for someone like you, part of your finding meaning in life is through this, pod course podcast, because this is something you're putting out there, right? So for anyone that's listening, thinking of the things that they do that gives them that feeling of fulfillment, that's a creative value. That's something you're bringing to the world. And most of us want to live our lives with meaning. That means we want to fill our time with meaningful tasks, with things that we feel like make a difference. So, and it doesn't have to just be, I think the word creative, and I wonder if you agree with this, gets a bad reputation because when we think of creative, we think like art and
Mm.
drawing pictures and being good at that type of creativity. And if that were the case, most of us, not most of us, but a lot of us would be kind of cordoned off from this idea of being creative. So I think it's important to reframe what creative means and what creativity means. And I think we all have creativity in us. The idea is we're all creative beings. That's our drive, one of our biggest drives. And so I think that using our creative values to find meaning, that's kind of the first tenet of
Yeah.
logotherapy. And Viktor Frankl himself, I think I mentioned this before when his manuscript was taken away from him. So one of the ways that he got through a concentration camp was almost rewriting this book in his head and actually even imagining himself. I believe he talks about how he imagined himself after the war speaking on the topics that
Right.
he wrote about, which of course he did.
Right.
And so even visualizing the creativity, that's still a creative value.
Yes,
So
I
that-
like that. Makes complete sense to me. One of my many years ago when I was going through 10 years ago, I'm now 50, but at 40, I had like that existential crisis of what am I doing with my life? And I did a deep dive into my values. And one of the values that I came away from was that I wasn't really focusing on was creatively making a difference in the lives of others. And so I totally get what you're saying. I can't draw, I can't dance, I can't sing. Nobody in my family wants me to do any of those things. The way I love to say I help people, how I focus on that is through creatively making a difference, whatever that in the moment I try to do, whether that's with a client or with a podcast or with a friend. So I can latch onto that and totally get what you're saying. I really appreciate that aspect of logotherapy personally. And I try to bring that out in my clients as well. I think that's something that's really important.
For
Mm,
sure. I
yeah.
think that's why I end up getting a lot of clients who are struggling with job transitions or
Yeah.
career transitions, because I think sometimes you're saying with an existential crisis at 40, sometimes at 20, you pick something to do and it works for that time, but then it's not really getting that, like pulling out the creative
Yeah.
values that you have, or maybe you have a lot more potential that you're just not actualizing. And listen, that's part of how I created my own consulting company, is because I felt like there was more to give and I felt like I needed to use more creative values. And I'm the same way. I can't do any of those creative things. I
Yeah.
can't dance, I can't act, I can't draw, I can't even make a stick figure. So it's really nice to know that to be creative, there's other ways.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just think about, and at 20-ish, I kind of went through a similar thing too. um, it's funny how I think there's lots of times in our lives when we go through these like big questions, maybe our career, our relationships, and it's okay that we have these questions. But it's like coming back to, the values, what is it that you hold near and dear and how do you want to show up in this world? And those are the things that guide me a good bit when I'm kind of stuck. So I love that, you are doing that with your clients. I think that's really, really important. Kind of got off on a sidetrack there. So, but
No
I
problem.
think this is really an important point, especially for my therapist peers out there who are listening. Sometimes the burnout factor can really hit, and the overwhelm factor and the heaviness of what it is that we do. So I want to encourage you guys out there to really think about this and go, circle back to it if you feel like it's something that you maybe lost a little bit in your profession. And it's okay. It's okay if you've lost it. Just you can always work on that. Something to work on. Okay, well, now that I've
Sure.
given my little like speech on that, Rikki.
Yeah. And by
Sorry.
the way, what you said is really important in terms of burnout, by the way, because this is really an antidote to burnout,
Yeah,
is
sure, sure.
creative values,
Mhm.
following the things that make you creative and make you light up, right? Because
Mhm.
burnout, it actually, I think Viktor Frankl says this. I might be incorrect. I'll look that up afterwards. But being burned out means you once had to be lit up. You can't burn out from something you weren't once excited about. And so constantly reevaluating your creativity, that helps with the burnout, because that ensures that you're not kind of doing the same thing over and over again and not having that excitement. So I think it's a very good point that you brought up burnout.
Great. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Awesome. So the next value is experiential values. Okay. And the reason it's kind of like one, two, and three, creative, then experiential, then attitudinal, is because there are times in our lives where we can't always create.
Mhm.
And so then what? Okay. So the then what is experiential values. So if creative values is what we give to the world, then experiential values is really what we get from the world, what we take from the world. And obviously, when you see the word experience, of course, you think of an experience like a sunset, a nice walk, a beautiful walk in nature. And those are, of course, experiences.
Mm.
One experience I think we forget to think of as an experience is actually the experience of other people, the experience of love. And that's huge. So, what we take out of this world, one of the most impactful things we take from this world is actually our relationships. I know it sounds funny because, of course, we give also to our relationships, but that's something we experience. And I think what a double whammy if you could experience a beautiful walk in nature with someone you love, that's both. But I believe really an experiential value is it's not always, you don't, right? So even Viktor Frankl talks about this in his books. He in the concentration camps didn't have the opportunity to create. Maybe he had the opportunity to imagine in his mind, but he didn't have the opportunity to really create.
Mm.
Um, but there were some experiences, like he even talked about, I think, like when the sky looked really beautiful one day in Auschwitz, which is a crazy thing to think about, but that gave him, and he made everybody come with him and look, you know.
Mm.
Sometimes there's just these experiences that give us such life, and
Right.
it's so hard to explain until we're there. Sometimes you're in a little bit of a funk and you just go outside, get some fresh air, and you're like, oh, the
Right.
world's better again.
Mm.
So that's really a big deal. Experiential values is what you take from the world, and then making sure you also have relationships that are fulfilling, that give you that feeling of fulfillment. Also, you can get a lot of fulfillment just from the experiences on a day-to-day basis and just filling yourself with positive experiences.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate that. Are there other experiential examples that you can give? I'm just besides going outside or being in the relationship. I guess I'm wondering, is this maybe this is another area, but like spiritual, would that go in here too?
Yeah, for sure. What exactly do you mean, like a spiritual experience more?
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe that's what it is. But I guess what you're saying is be open to experiences and pay attention to how they affect you. Maybe that's what it is. I don't
Yeah,
know.
100%. And also, I guess I would say like this. Remember how we talked about that Viktor Frankl, he very much believed that the will of human beings is for meaning and not pleasure. And so he would actually say you can't chase pleasure with an experience. So let's say, for example, you're on a vacation. This is something I think I wrote up once. You're on vacation because this is the classic thing that happens. And whenever you go on vacation, you're expecting it to be amazing because you planned so long for it. And then let's say it's just not going as planned. You lose your luggage or you're late or whatever it is, something's just not going right. And we plan the vacation hoping for the pleasure, hoping that it's going to give us this pleasure. But if we focus on the pleasure, it sort of runs away from us. It becomes elusive in a sense. And so focusing on the experience, on the experiential values is much more impactful. So what do I mean? So let's say you're going through the day and everything's going wrong and you're on vacation and it's so upsetting because you just want it to be great. So actually focus on the experience, focus on the other person, let's say. Focus on your kids. Let's
Mm.
say you're on vacation with your kids or your husband. Make sure he's having a good time or your kids are having a good time. Focus on the experience itself, and then the pleasure kind of comes. When we focus on the pleasure too much, then it runs away.
Yeah. You're have you seen the movie? And this just came to me, but do you remember the movie? And maybe I'm too old, but Vacation with Chevy Chase. Did you ever see that?
No, actually
Oh,
not.
okay, okay, so maybe you should maybe it's really funny, but
I should
this is
watch
a
it.
really big film in the '80s, and it kinda reminds me of some scenes where Chevy Chase is the overall theme is, "We're gonna have fun, darn it. You're gonna have a great time," and the kids are just, "Okay, okay." Like, he's so excited about all the fun they're gonna have, but along the way, all these mishaps happen, and, you know, as a parent, I totally get that. You want it to be all of these things, and all the stuff that the car breaks down, somebody dies. I mean, it's everything that you
Oh
don't want
god.
to happen on your vacation. And of course, at the end, it all kind of comes together for him and for the family. And it is all about the experience. But I can really relate to that as a, as a mom, as a parent. And sometimes I don't want to take the kids to their practices or do all this stuff on the weekends. And I'm just like, oh, I gotta get up so early. But if I step back from that and like really just focus on having the experience and knowing that, don't like you said, don't like chase the pleasure. The experience in itself is going to usually end up being a really nice time on some level because I'm with my family and we're doing something fun that the my kids are enjoying. And that in turn gives me, pleasure and enjoyment. But at the same time, like as a mom, it's like, well, when do I get that time for me? Like when do I get that experience for me? So I'm just kind of relating this to my life and bringing it back to, well, how do I as a busy mom doing all the things when do I have these how do I do that for myself? And I will share that, like, I go on long walks when I can, and I don't chase the final goal of getting 10,000 steps in. I'm almost just I just wanna have the experience of going out and seeing what birds I might encounter, what pretty bushes are blooming or what trees are blooming, and just really soak that in. So, that's I guess
Yeah,
it's just
for sure.
a
And I
side.
think that also speaks to the idea of presence, you
Yeah.
know? being present in your experiences. And I think that's a thing, especially in this day and age with social media.
Mhm.
And if everyone who's listening is like in the therapy field, then they definitely know that it's really hard to get people's attention and to get people to focus and to actually like be in an experience in whole body and soul. That's something that's very rare these days, but if you actually let yourself do it, it will impact you. It's
Right.
just that we're always looking at the clock, we're always looking at something else, we're always talking to a friend, but really looking at our phone because someone else might be texting us and and so it's hard for us to even enjoy these experiential like,
Mhm.
outings. It's hard to actually feel present. And so I think that's a huge thing. And I also think just even reframing our experiences, right? You mentioned as a parent.
Mhm.
So let's say as a parent, I read this quote once and it really was something that like helped me frame this, that one of our goals, as parents, or one of my goals as a child, right, is that I want to be able to go to my parents, not because, right, one of the marks of a good parent is that I'm happy to go to my parents, even though they're not paying for me, they're not in charge of me, but I want to go to them when I need something. I want to go to them for help,
Mhm.
right? That must mean that they did something right growing up. And so sometimes when I am stressed out about being present in an experience with my children, I try to reframe and think, okay, overall, what do I want my children's experiences to be like? And I want it overall, it doesn't matter about the tiny little details, but I want them to come to me when they don't have to.
Right. Yes. Yes, I love that. That's perfect. That's so smart.
Yeah,
That's
so I think that's like a big thing with experience. You
Mhm.
just need to be present, and sometimes you need to frame it in something bigger than that moment
Right.
so that you can really tap into that presence.
Right, right. Okay, yeah, I really like that example. It's perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so then the third and final way to find meaning, according to logotherapy, is through attitudinal values.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have creative, we have experiential, and then we have attitudinal. Now, attitudinal values, this is what happens when there is a life that you're living and you cannot change. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing creative you can do. There's nothing experiential with you that you can do. The only thing you can do is change your attitude.
Mm.
Okay. And it sounds like something we've always heard, but this is really important. And Viktor Frankl is talking about people in daily life, but he's also talking about like a lot of the examples that he writes about in his books are people with really terminal illness. The Doctor and the Soul, his book really talks about the bedside manner of a doctor and how a doctor needs to have a little bit of spiritual understanding of humans, because a lot of times doctors are dealing with people at the ends of their lives, and how are they to help their patients find meaning in such dark days. And so this is when attitudinal values really comes to the fore, really comes to the front. How do we react when we have no control? And of course, it doesn't just apply at the end of life. That just happens to be what he talks about a lot, but it can really apply anywhere where you don't have a choice anymore. Like there's no options. And I think that's a lot of times I have clients when they're very stressed out, I have them make a list. What are things you can control and what are things you can't?
Mhm.
Let's work on the things that you can control, but then we have to work on the attitude about what you can't, because there's just no option, right? And so I think that that's really important. And one of his most famous quotes, Viktor Frankl, he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. In other words, he's saying that once something happens to us, we have a little bit of space before we respond. And he actually calls responsibility a response ability, our ability to respond. And we can't just think that we don't have responsibility in life. We do. And he's very much into that, he's very, very into the idea of we have to take responsibility for actions. In fact, I believe there was this case study where he was speaking to a bunch of inmates who were on death row, and a lot of people were trying to talk to them, different psychologists, and like, no, they didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear it. What do they want to hear? And Viktor Frankl came along, and they went because they had to. And it was so impactful to them that actually apparently one of the inmates wrote like a whole article about it. But what he basically did was say to them, even at the end of your life, you still have a responsibility to live differently. And he it was really impactful to them because so many people were kind of telling them like, okay, like you did what you did, you served your time. Now it's time to enjoy whatever it was. And that wasn't speaking to them. What was speaking to them is you have a responsibility to feel guilty from what you did, but but forget about feeling guilty from, feel guilty towards. What are you going to channel that guilt towards? And so that was something he was very into is your attitude is everything.
Mhm. Yeah. Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. I could give you so many examples right now of
Yeah.
my personal life where my attitude, I walk away and I'm like, what? Ah, blah, blah, blah. Ah, just control what you can, which is
Yeah.
how I react and respond to things. I mean, I can't change what just happened, or I can't change what's going on in the world. And me being upset and frustrated and being in a grumpy mood around people that I love, and I don't want to be that person around them. What does that do? Doesn't it does so many things. And so I have to decide how I want to show up moving forward. Are you tired of sitting in front of a computer to watch hours and hours and hours of recorded trainings so you can get your continuing education requirements fulfilled? Look, I was, and I decided to do something about it. I have created convenient on the go learning that's completely audio based. I call them pod courses. Well, what's a pod course? Think of it as a hybrid between a captivating podcast and a self study course tailored for you, my perpetually busy counselor friend. In my pod courses, you can explore subjects like addiction issues, ethics and values in counseling, holistic approaches, and much more, all while you're on the move. Whether you're commuting, jogging, relaxing at home, whatever, pod courses blend your favorite podcasts with enriching self study courses, perfect for those always on the go. How it works. So tune in anywhere, anytime. Enjoy the pod courses on any device wherever podcasts are available. Quiz yourself, solidify your understanding with a brief quiz after each pod course. Then, last but not least, certify your smarts. Achieve a score of at least 80% to receive a certificate of completion. If you're curious to learn more about my pod course offerings, head to the link lisamustard.com/pod courses or just click the link in the show notes. Pod courses are brought to you with pride by Mustard Consulting LLC, your trusted NBCC ASEP provider. I have to be responsible for when I see that or hear that, or I have to keep it in check. That's how I
A
put it.
100%. And it's really hard. It's obviously easier said than done.
Yeah.
But like everything, like, I was once in this like really scammy situation where when you click the wrong button and the wrong
Mhm.
thing, and I ended up losing a lot of money and it was very
Mhm.
stressful. And there was really nothing I can do. Like there was no bank to call, no anything. Like at the end of the day, it was done.
Yeah.
And the only thing you have left is your attitude because you're going to have to go on from that moment. How do you react? And so, changing your attitude and working on your attitudinal values helps in every situation in life. And of course, I just said it's much easier to say, change your attitude,
Mhm.
but it's really only going to benefit you if you work on the attitude. And I also think that we can take time in that space, right? When we say there's a space between stimulus and response, that doesn't mean we have to be martyrs and we have to change our attitude at minute one.
Right.
It just means that eventually, if we want to get past this and we want to find meaning in the situation, then we're going to have to deal with our attitudes. And one of the things Viktor Frankl says, and I feel like we touched upon this, is suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning.
Mhm.
And so that's a big part of attitudinal values also. Okay, so let's say, you go through something really difficult and you change your attitude about it. It could be for a lot of people, the way they find meaning in suffering is sharing that suffering with others that are going through it so that they can help them when they're in that challenge. So a lot of times that's a way that people help, so that people find meaning in their lives. But changing your attitude towards, okay, this happened to me, now I'm going to use it to help others, or now I'm going to have this approach when this happens to me again, that's a huge thing because it helps us live our entire rest of our lives with a lot more meaning.
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay. Makes sense. Yeah.
Awesome. So should we move on to objective 3
Yes.
is compare how logotherapy differs from other therapeutic approaches like psychoanalysis, behaviorism. So of course we spoke like the fundamentals, right? Is that obviously Viktor Frankl, his idea is that it's about meaning and not pleasure, but it was really more than that. It's also much more forward thinking and a lot less past oriented. Now, that doesn't mean that he wasn't focused on your childhood and what you may have experienced, but he did understand, psychoanalysis, when it kind of started out, it was like a twice a week therapy for like weeks and weeks and weeks on end. First of all, it's not so affordable, and you can uncover a lot of things in your past. Your past is that. Didn't mean to rhyme that, but it is. And I think Viktor Frankl was very much focused on the future. Okay, yes, this happened to you. This is what you've experienced. This was difficult. Now we're going to focus on how you find meaning in the future because that's what you are about to live, or how you find meaning in the present. And so that was a big thing, is that he actually, I think it's known as height psychology. It's really talking about forward thinking, height, going. It's actually interesting because the cover of my book, because my grandfather was from Canada, so it's the Canadian Rockies, but I actually had intention with the hills. Is that it's about height psychology. So I didn't write that anywhere, and no one knows that, but I know it in my head. So it makes me
Mhm.
feel good. But
Great.
the idea being, right, that logotherapy is really focused on the future and not so much the past, and not oriented in the past. And again, that doesn't mean it's not focusing on your childhood traumas at all. And I know that that's very important, but it's kind of taking those and saying, okay, yes, you've experienced this. Now what?
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah, and then even, another behaviorism. So Alfred Adler, when he came out with his ideas in psychology, right, his kind of understanding was that the main drive of human beings was the will to power and dominance. And while this is also very true, us human beings, of course, we want to be in high positions. We want respect. We want things like that.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, that wasn't what Viktor Frankl was realizing was helping people. At the end of the day, as much as pleasure was beautiful, was nice. And of course, we all want pleasure, we all want happiness, we all want power. These are normal human things. And anyone that tells you, like, no, no one wants to be in a high position, no one wants respect. No, we all want respect. It's a normal human craving. I think his point was those aren't the things that are worth living for.
Yes.
Those, they're extra, they're nice, but if you're going to ask someone why are they alive,
Mhm.
that's not what it comes down to. And so he was very focused on, no, why are you living? Why are you alive? Why are you not committing suicide? He would really ask people that, which is, I guess only he could get away with that. But he did ask people that weren't suicidal, but like, why don't you commit suicide? Why are you alive? What's
Mhm.
the point of being on Earth? And you never really get answers that involve pleasure or power. You get answers of impact, of family, of, you know,
Mhm.
things that are really resonant of meaning of some sort. And so I think that's really how logotherapy differs from these other types of psychology, is that it's forward thinking and it's not focused you know, on this pleasure, on your behaviors themselves. It's not about your behavior, but it's about what you're finding in them.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I can see how this would be very future focused, very forward thinking. And that's actually the kind of coaching or counseling that I really like to do personally when I have somebody that I'm working with. It's like you said, these things happen to you. They have brought you here today. You're still kind of stuck in them. We can't change that past. Let's kick it around a little bit and understand what kind of meaning you made out of it and maybe brought to you where you are today. But moving forward, how do you want to live your life? How do you wanna show up in the world? So, I really can resonate with that. Mhm.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I hope this isn't controversial to say, but I think like a lot of like the pop psychology out there, like the
Mhm.
like little like Instagram memes and things like that, it's all about your trauma, your baggage, your this and your that. And like that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not belittling that because it's
Right.
so important and we all have
Sure.
baggage. But I think there's this overemphasis and it's almost puts people into this victim mentality where they can't get over it because they're so like they have to always live like this
Yeah.
because of their childhood. And I think that what logotherapy is different, is saying that no, actually,
Mhm.
there's a way forward and
Right.
you could come with all this baggage and still move forward.
Right. Yeah. I think that you're very spot on. I think you're very wise to pick up on that. And I think that, those Instagram, TikTok people that all they wanna do is talk about their mental health disorders and give themselves labels. I mean, and what are you doing this? Like, do you wanna get better or do you just wanna live, we should all, like, tiptoe around your diagnosis. I don't know. So I got lots of thoughts on that, and that's probably a whole other podcast episode. but I get what you're saying. I mean, I'm drawn to those people who do the social media posts or the TikTok on how they're experiencing life and the good that they're doing and the people that they're helping. And maybe they came from this place over here, but I learned this about myself and this is how I'm moving forward. I mean, to me, those are more of the inspirational stories that I want for people to just to be a part of, because I want people to know there's hope. There's so much hope if you have something that you're struggling with. So I think what you're saying, and I don't think it's controversial at all. I think you're spot on.
Yeah, I don't know, because there's a lot of people who post about this, so I don't know if it's just the loud people, but
Yeah,
it's
it's the loud people,
it's the loud
I
people,
think.
yeah. It's true. And yeah, it's just a very interesting phenomenon seeing what pop psychology talks about all day and how it's like really like no.
Mhm.
I guess as a therapist it probably bothers you even more. But yeah, I think about that a lot.
Mhm,
But yeah, so again, it's different. It's different, but it works together. It's almost like okay, it completes it. I don't think that Viktor Frankl would say don't do psychoanalysis, don't do behavior. I think it really just completes the package. It's that from maybe in psychoanalytic therapy, you will really gain a really impactful understanding of your past. And then with logotherapy, you'll be able to channel it for the future. And so it doesn't have to be either or, but it is different. It is focused in a different way.
definitely. Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Makes complete sense. It's just a different way to do this work. So, and you
Y-
can incorporate this in other work too. It's not like, all or nothing. You can bring these concepts into other, frameworks that you work within. So, I
For
think it's
sure. I think that's really important to emphasize. I know I'm talking about logotherapy today, so what sounds like, all logotherapy or nothing, but I do think there's a time and place for everything.
mm,
There's a time and place for CBD, CBT. There is a time and place for all of the different, like these all add wisdom to
mhm.
the way we treat and help clients and patients. This just happens to be what we're talking about today. So I want to really do a deep dive and kind of differentiate it from other things. But of course, like you just said, it can go in tandem with everything
Mhm.
else really
Yeah.
beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some of the therapeutic techniques that I know you mentioned some stuff earlier. When you really dig into it, what are the techniques that he brings to light with logotherapy?
Sure. Okay, so there's really three main ones
Mhm.
that he talks about. So one is known as dereflection. Okay, so what is dereflection? So I kind of got into it a little bit with the vacation experience that we were talking about. And the idea of dereflection is really looking beyond yourself. Okay, like I said before with the pleasure, if you're seeking pleasure, if you're seeking, even he says you can't try to self-actualize. Trying to self-actualize is going to get you farther away from it. That's not like a good focus, it's an outcome.
Mhm.
And so what he says is the way to focus, the way to accomplish those things is through dereflection. So what dereflection is focusing, dereflecting, focusing beyond yourself. So let's say it was came to the vacation, so focusing on the experience of your kids. Like, okay, my kids are going to have a great time. I'm going to make sure my kids have a great time because I'm not having a great time, but my kids are going to have a great time, right? Or just trying to like focus on any such way that it's not all about you, because sometimes when you're in your own head, it can be a it's like you can't get out of it. It's very
Mhm.
hard to get out of it. And when you're stuck in yourself, it's hard to achieve pleasure. It's hard to achieve happiness. Happiness also, you can't chase happiness. It kind of has to also be an outcome.
Mhm.
Even in like the most pleasurable of things, right? A sexual experience, let's say, the whole idea there also is you have to focus on the other person, right? That's part of it. And of course, pleasure is supposed to ensue, but it's not necessarily if you're focused on this is going to be an amazing experience, then it's not it doesn't always work that way.
Right.
Sometimes you have to de-reflect in
Mhm.
order to experience the positive effects.
Mhm. Mhm. So how would you can you give me example of asking a client to do that? Did you reflect on something?
So if someone's going through something, let's say like one thing that could come up often is a difficult relationship, let's say, that a client is experiencing. And so a lot of times when they're really focused on how they're made to feel, on how they're experiencing this difficult time, about woe is me a little bit. And I don't mean to poop, be
Sure.
not nice about that, because again, there is a time and place to, you know,
Mhm.
really sink into your difficult feelings. At a certain point when it's not getting you anywhere, I think that's the time to de-reflect and say, okay, I'm in this really difficult situation. How can I get outside of myself? And sometimes that could involve, sometimes you're going through something difficult in your own life, and a friend calls you and wants to share their own problem. And first, it takes you a minute because you're like, wait, I'm dealing with my own problems. But then when you actually take a second and let that person vent to you, you're in this position of helping, and it almost makes you feel so much better, and your problem seems to almost like dissipate.
Mhm.
It's not as horrible as it was before you took the phone call. I think that's a big part of de-reflection, is just not always focusing on your own problems, not always focusing on yourself. And even when you are dealing with things, sometimes taking a break from them and doing something totally different. Doesn't even have to be de-reflection in terms of someone else, but even de-reflection in terms of, you know, finding something else to do.
Mhm.
That's a big thing. I think sometimes just taking a break from
Right.
the situation. I think people always, and I think this dovetails nicely with other forms of therapy. We always talk about how exercise is so important.
Mhm.
So if you're going through something difficult and you keep thinking it through and take a minute, go run around the block. That's also an example of de-reflection. So I
Okay.
think this is an impactful technique because it helps you really get out of your own head. And then it almost gives you a much broader perspective when you actually come back to your problem.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that would be really helpful. Well, I mean, just thinking about clients I've had in the past when there's symptoms of depression, being able to get out of your own head and go do something for somebody else, or just can you take a break? If you were able to take a break from these symptoms that you're having, what would that look like? What would you need to do? I think that's kind of, um, and maybe I even do this and I don't realize it. And I kinda go back to the parenting thing because y'all, we got 2 girls in the house, and they're at that age, they're at that age. So I have to de-reflect a good bit, like, in the grand scheme of things, this isn't that big of a deal. This isn't that bad. We are going to survive this. Let me take a step back. Let me look at the bigger picture here and really figure out how I wanna move forward with this. So I think these examples are in my I think they're good. They're very helpful for me as I kind of figure out how do I do this? Or am I actually doing this in sessions and I don't realize I'm doing it? So thank you
Yeah,
for
no, you probably are. I mean, I think that depression is a really good example because a lot of times doing things for others really
Mhm,
does bring us to a point of feeling fulfilled.
mhm.
And sometimes it's hard because you're so stuck in yourself that you almost need someone to kind of like give you that jolt
Yeah.
of go out there and just do one nice thing. And you know, those cute videos where it shows one act of kindness leads to the next, but it really is true.
Mhm.
Sometimes just doing something and then it makes the other person smile. We always have that good feeling when we do something nice. And so
Yeah.
I think that's a really great way to de-reflect for sure. For anyone experiencing anything negative, the second you do something nice for someone else, it totally changes your day
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. So de-reflection is one of the techniques. All right. So what
Perfect.
else? What else?
Another one, and this also kind of goes in well, is Socratic dialogue.
Mhm,
So this is, something that comes from Socrates, an idea of Socratic questioning. It's basically like really just questioning a person, constantly in a sense until they get to the bottom of it.
mhm,
And I think this is something that is really prevalent in the coaching world. I always say really coaching is about good and probably in therapy world also because we're not really in the business of giving advice necessarily. We want to help people uncover
mhm,
themselves. And so the best way to do that is to ask really important and impactful questions.
mhm,
And those questions need to really get at the core of who the person is and what the person values, whether we're getting to creative values, to experiential values, to attitudinal values. We want to really understand, this is a more intense question, what do you want to be remembered for? Or write your eulogy. Things of those nature, and then really getting through it and questioning constantly until you really get to a place of, we figured something out.
mhm,
That's one of his techniques that he used in therapy all the time, is to really, really understand someone. You have to ask them a lot of questions.
mhm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you have to ask a lot of questions in therapy. That's really what it comes down to. It's just asking questions, and then eventually you hit the right questions, and then just keep asking from there. Yeah, I love that. I think that's perfect.
Yeah, we don't always think of questions as being a technique, but it really is. That's the best way. And I always say that the mark of a good session with a client is that they were talking for more than I was.
Oh, yeah.
right? So as long as I don't need to be sitting there giving them answers, that's not really what they want. They want
Right.
to give themselves answers, but they just need to figure out which questions to answer. And so I think that's what we really provide in therapy and coaching. And so that's why Socratic dialogue is such an impactful kind of technique.
Is there a type of book out there that covers Socratic dialogue that you know about? Or is there anything that Frankl wrote that covers different?
So I think in his book, The Doctor and the Soul, I'm pretty sure he has a bunch of examples because I remember pulling a bunch of examples from his book and wrote them down in my own little notebook to kind of have. I believe in his books he writes it. He writes examples of important questions. And they really get to the heart of the issue fast. He asks intense questions. Like I said, he'll ask someone why do you not commit suicide? So his questions are intense, but they're definitely worth looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to have to go check those out.
And then I guess the last one that's really important is called paradoxical intention. And so this one, I think the more I've used it, the more I've seen it that it really works. And part of it is really about humor. So a lot of what Viktor Frankl talks about is that humor really helps you rise above a situation in a way that you weren't able to before. And so in the concentration camps, he used humor a lot because that gets you out of your situation for even a split second when you're able to laugh. And I know my grandfather did this because I remember towards the end of his life when he had visiting nurses and someone came and took his blood pressure. They're like, "Can I take your blood pressure?" And he's like, "Yeah, as long as you give it back."
Yeah.
Right? And obviously that's silly, but things like that just to get yourself above a very scary situation for a moment. So paradoxical intention is really couched in humor, and so I'll give you a funny example, but then there's some more serious examples that I can think of. So let's say, you're about to give a speech, you're about to give a public speaking, and public speaking is up there with death on people's number one fear list.
Mm.
And so imagine your palms are really sweaty and you're freaking out like, oh my God, this is gonna be really scary. So what paradoxical intention would say is that, hey, instead of saying, "Oh my God, I don't want my hands to be sweaty," instead reframe that as, "I'm going to have the sweatiest hands that anyone has ever had in the entire universe. People are going to see how sweaty my hands are from the back of the room, and I'm going to win the award for the
Mhm.
sweatiest hands."
Mhm.
And somehow thinking like that ends up paradoxically
Mhm.
helping you get over that fear. If you would say, "I'm so nervous," so Viktor Frankl would say, "Okay, be nervous. Win the award for the most nervous person in the room."
Mhm.
And by the way, this works also with little kids. I remember my son was crying. A lot of times, I know this isn't really the right thing to do, which I learned. You say like, "Stop crying. It's all good. It's gonna be okay. Don't cry." That wasn't working. So instead, I didn't know what to do. It was bedtime. That's always when the crying happens. So I said, "You know what? Cry as hard as you can. I want you cry. They're gonna hear you all the way in another country in England. They're gonna just cry so loud and just don't stop crying ever." Literally, it got him to stop crying.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the idea behind paradoxical intention. But I think it works in other situations also where it's mostly focused on detaching from the outcome.
Mhm.
And so, let's say, you know, eh, I'm trying to think of an example that would make sense, right? So maybe someone's running a business and they're trying really hard in their business to attract clients or whatever it is. And they're realizing that whatever they're doing, they're not selling, they're not getting clients. So paradoxical intention would say, okay, you're not even allowed to sell anymore. Just talk to people.
Right.
See
Makes
how
sense.
that goes. I
Mhm.
tried that myself, by the way, and it did work
Mhm.
um, at that time when I tried it. And so that's really the idea. In relationships, also, stop focusing so much on the outcome and focus on just do the thing that you're doing, and the outcome will follow. And I think that's really what paradoxical intention is about.
Yeah, makes sense. I was kind of coming up with some examples while you were going over yours, and one that came to mind was in some of y'all know this. I've been studying to become a hypnotherapist, and one of the things, if somebody, what do you do if somebody's like really, really shaking as you're working with them in hypnosis? And the one of the suggestions is ask them to shake more. ask them to shake more. Just say, because the idea is if you can make yourself shake more, then you can make yourself stop shaking. So I
Wow.
similar, maybe a little bit. I don't
No, it
know.
is.
I
Totally
mean,
is.
yeah. So that kind of came to mind because a lot of people were worried about, well, what if they just can't stop shaking in session? What do I do? What do I do? It's like, ask them to shake as much as they can. And usually you show them, if you can make yourself shake more, you can make yourself shake less, or, your anxiety, your feelings kind of thing. But then the one about with little kids, yeah, stop crying. I mean, I remember doing that with my girls. Eventually, it's like, yeah, keep crying, get it all out, keep going. I want the neighbors to hear you. And they try for a minute, and then they kind of start laughing, or they go, oh, that's really hard, you know.
Exactly.
And it's that's it. Those are. I mean, I say fun examples, but those those are things that I can remember really well from when our kids were little.
Yeah, I mean they're supposed to be funny like
Mhm.
examples, but that's the point that like for Viktor Frankl, humor was actually a technique. Like
Mm.
it was something humor exists for a reason and we may as well use it to our advantage. It's very right. We always like talk about how it's important to have a sense of humor. Why is it so important? Because if you don't have a sense of humor, you're gonna cry all day. Life
Right.
is tough.
Yeah.
So I think that, paradoxical intention being couched in humor a little bit is actually really um impactful because it kind of reminds us like don't take life so seriously always.
Mhm.
Sometimes you got to make light of a situation in order to find find the light. You have to make
Right.
the light.
Right, right, and the fact that he could do that in the Holocaust in a concentration camp is is pretty amazing that he could
Yeah.
he could find that.
Yeah, and I do think by the way he writes about times when he felt very depressed and he felt like there was no hope. It's not like he had this like
Right.
perfect experience, but overall, when he came out, he was able to, when he came out and found out all his family members were killed. So that was like the height of his depression.
Mm.
I think once he met his new wife, he was married before the war, and his wife, I believe, died in one of the concentration camps. When he met his new wife, that's when things started turning around for him. So it's not like he was always so happy with all of
Right,
the
yeah.
things he went through, but he was able in the end to really kind of put this together.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Well, is there anything else that you would like us to know about logotherapy, or any other important things to cover?
So I guess the only really thing is that this is not the type of thing that you really learn about in school.
Mm.
I teach AP psychology. I think logotherapy was only ever the wrong answer on a multiple choice section, actually. And it's funny, someone asked me what it is. I'm so excited someone asked me. But I think the idea really is that people are scared of this type of therapy because it's it's a little bit spiritual. It's a little bit focused on the spirituality aspect of finding meaning, and it's not necessarily so based in science. And from the research I've done, when I read research articles, because this is part of what I'm doing my dissertation on, I notice a lot of the research talks about how there's a lot of fear about this type of therapy because it's really not scientific. You can't necessarily do
Mm.
a study or whatever it is the same way you can with, let's say, behaviorism or whatever it is. And so there is a lot of resistance in using this, I think, out there, which is why I kind of made it my mission to publicize because I think there is a lot that exists in the spiritual dimension that might be difficult to exactly quantify using the scientific method, but is still impactful. And again, that doesn't mean it has to replace everything you've always used until now. It just means that these are extra tools to have in your back pocket that can really work and that can really help someone overcome what Viktor Frankl refers to as this existential vacuum, as this
Yeah.
feeling of nothingness and like, where am I?
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying, but I also wanna put out there that sure, there's not like the research, the findings, like a behavior type of therapy, or maybe even EMDR or something like that. But what I find to be the case is that if the therapist adopts or adapts these types of questions to their presence or how they interact with their clients, if they ask these questions that are strength based and that are future focused and are helpful, and the client has a good experience, and they come out of the therapy and say, I grew, I evolved, therapy is working for me, then I would want to know, okay, if they didn't do EMDR and they didn't do these like behavior therapies, what did they do? Oh, they just were a good therapist. Because I feel this framework in itself helps therapists become better therapists, if that makes sense. I don't know. I'm just putting that out there. And
Yeah.
I say that mainly because 10 years ago when I was going through my own stuff, and I actually worked with a life coach who used a lot of this framework. I don't think he realized that he was using logotherapy, but a lot of his framework was about values and about meaning. What are you? What's your purpose? What are you here for? Are you living that out? I took that into my own therapeutic toolbox, and I started using that with my clients. And now it's one of my favorite things that I do with my clients, and that I'm allowed to expand on that at my job, which is really cool. I want to push back a little bit on that there may be not any scientific evidence, but knowing that a lot of these things help therapists become better therapists. And at the end of the day, when they really want to know why did therapy work, it's the relationship between the therapist and the client or the patient that is the biggest key to therapy being effective. So I hope that makes sense. I feel like I got a little bit
Yeah.
out there, a little bit woo woo maybe, but
No, it totally, no,
okay.
I totally makes sense for sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
For
because I
sure.
mean, even as a life coach, I'm guessing that just because you're not doing the those evidence-based frameworks like EMDR or behavior therapy, your clients are still getting really good results,
Yeah.
you know? So, yeah, I don't know. I just had to put that out there because
Oh, for sure.
yeah,
No, it's true. It's definitely right. Obviously, I wouldn't be talking about it if I
right.
didn't think it was impactful. I just mean
Right, yeah.
it's interesting. It's not one of those things that comes up in grad school for
Sure.
psychology very often. So I just
Right.
wanted to say, if you haven't heard of it, don't think it doesn't work. It's just maybe not as based in the scientific method as some others are. But like you said, it can be really helpful just in making you a better therapist, a better, and just in general, even a better friend.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all this. And I love your work. I love what you're doing and how you're helping people. And I'm grateful, so grateful that you were able to do this. So thank you, Rikki. Thank you so much. And if people want to learn more about you, where should they go?
Sure, consulting.com,
Mhm.
but consulting is spelled with an SOUL, like
Okay.
soul, consulting.
Okay.
People think I spelled it wrong, but it's purposeful. I like to consult with soul, if you haven't noticed. So yeah, rikkiashconsulting.com.
Okay.
And yeah,
I'll put that in the show notes for everybody to find, and we'll tag you on all the social media platforms that you are a part of. So thank you again for being here. This has just been amazing.
yes, thank you so much as well.
Please note that the therapy show with Lisa Mustard is for informational and entertainment purposes only and not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice. Always consult with your therapist, doctor, or physician before implementing any suggestions from the show. The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard is edited and engineered by Chelsea Weaver. If you're looking to start a podcast or ready to take the editing off of your plate, be sure to visit chelseaweaverpodcasting.com. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine. Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover all the pod courses and other continuing education offerings. And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.